I look up and this person that had filed many, many sexual harassment complaints has dropped a couple buttons on their blouse and is looking up at me with eyes that I had not seen other than in some scary movies. And I'm wondering, what the heck do I do now?
This is the Freedom Club podcast. I am your host, Curt Mercadante, and you are fortunate to be here today because I have yet another incredible interview for you. Again, thanks so much for being here. Listen, the month of April was our most downloaded month ever in the history of this podcast. Now, yeah, we're only about a year and a half old, but I want to take this opportunity to thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your positive ratings and reviews. Thanks for sharing us on your social media networks. We continue to grow month after month, episode after episode, and it's all because of you. And because we continue to grow, listen, I don't give a shit about the download numbers, except that they mean that hopefully we're able to help more and more people around the globe escape to a life of freedom and fulfillment. Now, freedom takes many forms, and you hear me week after week ask people what the word freedom means to them. Now, for some people, it means escaping to a life of entrepreneurship. Sometimes it means a full lifestyle transformation, but it also means freedom from working in a toxic, shitty work environment, which we talk about today with my guest, Pete Havel. He's author of The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures. Now, listen, I've worked in some toxic work environments. As a lifestyle coach, I'm working with people who are either looking to escape from toxic environments or recently escaped from toxic environments. But when you read Pete's book, and we talk about it a bit in today's podcast, but we only scratched the surface. His story, and he's created kind of a fictional book about a true life story that happened to him. The toxic workplace he describes is so extreme, it even knocked my socks off. So we not only talk about toxic workplaces, the workplace that Pete talks about, but also how we also talk about where the title "The Arsonist in the Office" comes from, because it's a crazy story. But we also talk about how managers can build workplaces that are more human and better to work in, and certainly not toxic, and what to do if you're an employee who, like Pete, unknowingly steps into a viper's nest. He's a great storyteller. He's got a great story to tell, an important story to tell. And without further ado, here's my interview with Pete Havel, author of The Arsonist in the Office.
Welcome to the Freedom Club podcast, where we strive to pull you out of your life of quiet desperation, out of your comfort zone of misery, and propel you into a life of freedom and fulfillment. And now, here's your host for this journey, international speaker and coach, and serial entrepreneur, Curt Mercadante.
Let's get right into this book. Because you unknowingly, like a lot of people do, walked into, as I called it, a viper's nest, in which, listen, there were a lot of people think about toxic workplaces, and maybe the first thing that comes to their mind is harassment that moves one way. Maybe It's from male to female. In this story that you tell, other than yourself, there really are no great people in here, male or female, right? I mean, it really is a situation like bizarro world.
It really was. And to a certain extent, I disagree with you a little bit on what you said about there not being any good people, because there was some horrible behavior by a few of them. I turned a real life experience into a fictional experience. So I'm going to describe these people as characters, and they were characters in more ways than one. But what I really found, and this is where culture becomes a really important thing, is that good people can do some horrible things. And a lot of it is based on them finding themselves in situations, and I'm not rationalizing what they did, but you had one extremely toxic person, and then a bunch of people that may have been fine otherwise, but in acts of self-preservation, they start doing some horrible things and making terrible decisions, things that go far outside of policy, far outside of the bounds of reason, just to cover their butts and make sure that their retirements were intact, that their careers were not scuttled. And it was really good people. And you find this in a lot of bad situations, whether it's in history or in the business world, you name it. Good people put in bad situations do some miserable stuff. And you've got to watch out for it if you're in the middle of it.
Interesting. Well, now, so let's get into the book. I want everyone to buy the book. We're going to talk about where they can get the book.
But the shameless plug where I do that?
Yes, exactly. And I'll plug it too. So the Arsonist in the Office, people may wonder where that comes from. And it really is the crux of the entire story. So maybe let's start there. What does that mean? And when you told me the story, I was like, what?
Yeah. Let me start with, and this is where the book starts. Me walking into a new job, pay looked incredible. The benefits looked great. So many things seemed to be right up until the point I walked in the doors. And people began talking to me almost as though I had a terminal disease that they knew about that I didn't. People coming up to me, asking me if I was who they thought I was, and saying things like, I'm praying for you. Or, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Questions like, do you know what your job is all about? Did they really tell you? And I'm looking around, wondering where the hidden cameras are about this situation that didn't seem right. And it really only took a few hours until I found out what was going on. I was called into the office of the head of the organization, who came to me and said, Pete, I probably should have told you all of this before you took this job, but I don't think you'd be here today. And what I want to focus on is talking about your new coworker, Hazel. Hazel has filed at this point about 30 different complaints against people in the organization. And she's threatened a bunch of lawsuits. She's sabotaged a lot of work, and Pete, you ought to be worried about that. And she's wrecked a lot of reputations. And oh, by the way, we've given you much of her job, so she's probably coming after you. And he said, if I haven't explained it clearly enough, and here's where I say, as if that were necessary, I needed more explanation of what I was dealing with. He said, I want to tell you the whole story. And he told me about a volunteer fire department somewhere in the South that had far more fires than they had ever had before that year. And people began getting a little suspicious. This many fires being set. And he said, so they did some investigation, and they found out that the problem started with people realizing at the top levels of the fire department that there were some needs for new equipment, and they weren't going to get it if there were only the 15 to 20 fires during the year. They decided they needed more. And then there were some other fires, the rank and file firefighters heard about that. One guy said, hey, I've got a buddy of mine whose business is tanking. He needs an insurance check. We can light a fire over there. Somebody else decides, that jerk that lives down the street, why don't I light his shed on fire? Other guys were pyromaniacs. The next thing you know, you have fires. We had fires burning everywhere in that county, he told me. And he said, so that's kind of what you're dealing with. And I remember looking him straight in the eyes. I pulled my jaw up off the floor. And I said, so you're describing her as an arsonist? And he said, well, yeah, but we've determined that with all she's done, with all she has the capability of doing, we can't fire her. So she's our arsonist. And Pete, good luck to you. Welcome to the team. And we've heard you've gotten along with everybody in past jobs. I think you'll do just great if given a shot. And there, my friends, was my onboarding introduction to the firm.
Wow. Yeah, like I said, and that's your first day. It takes the cake in terms of toxic workplaces. So where did it go from there? I mean, how long did it take you to really sink your teeth into, or I guess to keep it up, to truly get burned?
Oh gosh! Well, and it's the level of burn, that first degree versus third degree type of burn. I won't do too many spoiler alerts, but after that meeting I talked about with the head of the company, he said, well, I'm sure some other people are going to want to meet with you. And my next meeting was with one of my supervisors, who suggested I go to lunch with Hazel. And you're probably still unnerved if you've read it about the lunch where I'm sitting across from somebody. I can't say I was enjoying my lunch, but I was experiencing it with Hazel. And I look up, and this person that had filed many, many sexual harassment complaints has dropped a couple buttons on their blouse and is looking up at me with eyes that I had not seen other than in some scary movies. And I'm wondering, what the heck do I do now? So it was dodging bullets at various times. The amazing thing about an arsonist in the office is that most of them tend to be high performers. Most of them tend to be very smart, but they are a Swiss Army knife of dysfunction, in that it wasn't just that strange episode at lunch. I had people around me attacked. I was receiving all sorts of threats, both from my supervisor, who had no idea, admittedly from her own words, of how to deal with this person, but almost became in an effort to preserve her career, because she had been assigned, go manage this person, figuring out how to deal with it. And it almost felt like I was in a Stockholm syndrome type of situation, in that the manager felt captive to anything and everything that this rogue employee was doing, because she was handed somebody, told, you've got to succeed in dealing with them, but had none of the tools with which to manage them, confront them, correct them, you name it. And culturally, when the inmates are running the asylum, you've got a problem. And I sure have.
Was it a case where not just both sides, but things were actually happening between Hazel and others in the office? Or was she making it all up? Or was she making it happen in the hopes that she could then file complaints?
You know what? I felt like at times my office was a confessional booth, in that people were coming up to me constantly. And some of these were just awful, painful situations. A guy who had been accused of sexual harassment, that said that he had barely ever had any type of verbal contact, much less physical contact or any type of flirting or anything like that. I had an admin assistant who got removed while her parent was literally on their deathbed, because of attendance problems that they had during that time. And I had my HR department, who was equally compromised in their culture, coming to me and saying that, well, there's really nothing we can do about this situation. This employee needs to go because Hazel has some chits in and is not going to be, stopped in trying to get things done. And again, it goes back to that management that had set in place a culture in which she was not going to lose any battles. It was incredible to watch.
She just didn't like that particular person and wanted her gone.
Well, and in that case, it was a situation, and they actually told me this, that I was going through a very busy time in my workplace with the congressional session heating up, and that this was used as a move to, yes, knock out the admin, but it was mostly an effort to come after me.
Oh,
and so it's an office politics 101 in terms of using force, using tools to do what you want to.
So, wrapping up the story about the office, because I want to talk about the steps you talk about fireproofing and dealing with this. You are obviously no longer there. Is Hazel still there?
Hazel continues in other capacities in life to be a human flamethrower against others, I'm sure.
Yeah. So this story is obviously it's an extreme example, or maybe actually I say that now I'm going to get emails from people who are even more extreme. But you've worked in a variety of workplaces and environments. Have you seen, maybe not to the level of Hazel, arsonists in various workplaces? And now you're hearing from people, right, that we were talking offline, that you wrote the book, and now that you're out there, people are saying, hey, I'm having this problem and I need you to come speak to us and help us. Is it a broader, did this open your eyes that the arson problem is broader than maybe you ever thought about.
It's sharpening my understanding of it every day. In that, as I was writing the book, I found myself in that awkward time before a friend's funeral. Strangers standing in the back of the church, talking about whatever because they have no commonality between each other than the deceased. And at that time, I had an incident where a friend of mine said, well, this is Pete. Hey, he's writing a book on crazy workplaces, toxic workplaces, etc. And the next thing I know, I'm the focus of attention with a crowd around me with people sharing their stories. So I kind of knew it then, but now I'm really finding out in that I was on a plane the other day and a woman began breaking into tears when, she saw the book cover on my tray in front of me and begins to tell her story. The people I was with, and this, I hope I don't offend any IT people in your audience when I say this, but I was speaking in front of an IT group, not exactly the most emotive crowd, I would imagine, in terms of an industry, but I spoke to an IT group the other day about rogue employees, told my story, and just left them with a little bit of my experience in what I went through when I found myself out of the job after having pushed back against the arsonist in my office. And the stories that they began to tell, I guess, let me put it this way. I never thought I was going to be getting hugs from people in a group of IT professionals saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. I've got one of my own. And thank you for the courage and stepping forward and telling stories for everybody. It feels pretty good.
The topic, I guess, broadly of harassment and not just of toxic workplaces, but more specifically harassment, has been in the public spotlight over the past several years. And it seems like a lot of the discussion has centered around punishing wrongdoers, which is important, right?
Absolutely.
If you do something wrong, you should punish them. But a lot of it, what are we missing with this discussion, right? Because in this case, there were a lot of people, like you said, they might have been good people doing bad things. Mm-hmm. And there were people in the wrong who were men. There was Hazel, who is not a man. The whole thing, as you were explaining to me, reminded me of like House of Cards, where it's like, just when you think there's a good person, it's like, oh my gosh, they're a murderer too, or they're sleeping with this person, So what are we missing in the entire debate about harassment in the workplace?
Oh, and there's a bunch going on with it right now. One of the things that I think we need to focus on, because frankly, this is an issue that the New York Times has focused on a bit. Bloomberg had a report out about it, and it is, okay, when the Me Too movement started in 2017 or 2016, whenever it was, there was the focus on, like you say, dealing with the wrongdoers, the Harvey Weinsteins of the world. That was great. And then we moved into maybe around the time when, around the time of the Kavanaugh hearings, for instance, and you started hearing some things such as believe all women, which if you flip that around means any man who is accused is guilty or, should be presumed to be guilty if there's a complaint made. And some of the dynamics we're seeing now are pretty scary for, in my case, the dad of a 15-year-old daughter who wants to go out into the world, do great things. And what's taking place now, and I hear it from small and mid-sized companies, is the instinct, and again, self-preservation is a huge value to people. You've got companies now that tend to be male-heavy at the top that are looking at female applicants now and saying, okay, if there's a jump ball in the hiring process, I have 2 applicants, I'm probably going to go with the guy because I'm not going to have the Me Too issue popping up. And that is both, for me, a terrible thing, and it is somewhat, I can understand it. I don't agree with it, but I understand that fear concept in that I've been there in dealing with the false accuser. So it set up a situation where you've got that hiring issue now that is a bit under the radar, but it's starting to pop up a bit, and it's not good for men. It's absolutely not good for women. And that's why I call in my book for really a toning down and a pushing away of the extreme voices on it. We certainly don't want people to pretend that harassment either isn't taking place or isn't being taken seriously. We want those investigations to be taking place. And if you're targeting an employee, you ought to be taking punishment for what you've done. But on the other side, we don't want the extreme voices that are frankly juicing up the rhetoric, but really causing damage to both men and women in the debate. So I talk about one of the elements that's missing is dealing with the false accuser that's out there that is really that fear of a lot of people. In that one case that may knock you out of the job, may take you down from a position you've worked for years. And if you're guilty, good luck to you and good riddance. But if you're innocent, it could destroy you. It could destroy your marriage. It could destroy your finances. It could destroy your reputation. And taking out that element and focusing on the false accusers, no matter how small they may be as a percentage, we've got to talk about that as well.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways, listen, there's always, whether you talk about hiring overall, and I was having this discussion with yesterday about hiring and people I bring onto my team and that I used to bring onto my team. And you can do a lot of things, but it's never going to be 100% correct, right? There's always going to be people that look on paper, you look at their strengths, you look, oh, perfect. And then 2 weeks into it, humans are humans, right? But what are some of the steps for people listening that you can share for people to help fireproof? You call it fireproofing your workplace.
That's right. One of them is group hiring. You would see things that I wouldn't in a person. You may hear things differently. Just having more sets of eyes on a person when you're hiring is a big thing that works well in a lot of companies. Of course, you've got to have the good employees there to do it. Another thing, if you have that culture in place, you've got to honor it, and people need to know you're serious about it, because you're going to get certain values of people that start coming to it if they share their values. I was talking to a financial services company earlier in the day that has a no. This is Facebook and podcast, so I could say bad words. They have a no a-holes policy, and that is, they publish it, they broadcast it in terms of this is what they stand for. And that attracts people that agree with that resonate with that. Southwest Airlines says the same thing. They have good people that understand there's ground rules for working here. If you're a jerk, you're going to go. If you're if you're toxic and spreading trouble and gossip, you're going to leave quickly. Sure, they've got the happy side, but they've also got the enforcement side as well that's going to take care of those problems. So it is setting up the culture. And another thing I love, and this was done by the CEO of Charles Schwab, a guy named Charles Bettinger. And what he would do is bring a candidate to lunch or breakfast and get there a little bit early and tell the waiter or waitress, hey, screw up this guy's order. And, throw something weird in there, mess it up, bring it to the table, and see what the reaction is of the person. Do they go through it like an adult? Are they rude to the waiter or waitress? It's a perfect way to get a little bit of a real life feel for who this person is. Now, I'm guessing the guy can't do that anymore and that everybody's read that article. But there's ways to find out who this person is. And frankly, and I've heard companies that do this, companies that have knocked people out of the job process because they were rude to an administrative person, somebody that does not hold power in the organization. And they looked at them and think, we don't want this guy as part of our team if they're going to be rude to our support people. So those are some ways. Certainly doing more careful background checks. I know I've been in situations where people have given me 3 references, or I've provided 3 references. Companies aren't taking that seriously. They're checking the box, and you can find out about a person if you want to, but there's some laziness that's been involved in those processes that stop well short of finding out who that person is.
Now, the things you're talking about are, and you and I have both spoken, you spoke last night, to disrupt HR. And I talked about not necessarily as toxic of a workplace, but an inputs-based workplace, which is more where you're judged on, are you in your seat at 8:30 versus are you empowered to use your superpowers to create key outcomes, right? But one of the things I ended with was, listen, if you are here at Disrupt HR and you're someone who's not just here to have the free drinks and meet some people, but you're here because you really want to disrupt the industry, disrupt the workplace. But you know in your heart of hearts that of all the people you've listened to, that you're going to go back to work and your management is just going to say, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to do things the way they've always been done. I ended and I said, then you have a duty to speak up or ship out.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't make the change, then you're complicit. Mm-hmm. And like you said, there were good people doing bad things. And in my mind, if you sit there and you turn a blind eye, whether it's a blind eye to the stuff that was happening in your workplace or turn a blind eye to harassment, you're part of the problem.
No doubt.
So a lot of the message you're dealing is for people at the top. If you're in HR, you have a duty to speak up or get out. If you're at the management and you're listening to this and like, yeah, I'm going to fix things. What if you're lower on the totem pole and you're in a workplace? And I guess you could have a variety of equations here, right? You could have a thing where middle management is toxic and the CEO is an ideas guy and is not aware of it. That's one thing. You could have one where it's top to bottom, just kind of toxic. What do you say to someone in that position where they're like you, trapped or seemingly trapped?
Yeah. And you're right. Leadership is the one that's going to control the culture for the most part. If you are that middle management, if you're being supervised by someone, you have some choices to make. And this is something that I learned. I became a lot smarter after I left this job than I was in it. I had spent my career in politics and I could diagnose anybody else's issues like crazy, helping somebody get elected or working them through a legislative issue. I could get it done, but it took me some thinking and time and understanding of the dynamics to get to this point. You've got some decisions to make if you find yourself in a toxic situation and you're being targeted and you don't have many tools. You can like it or lump it. You can sit there and take it. You can protect yourself as well as possible. But after that point, if you make the decision that you want to do something about it, you better know your terrain, the rules of the road, and what the culture is before you step forward and say anything. You need to find out what happens to people that speak up, because you may find yourself out of a job. It is not uncommon. Actually, I'm finding it's highly common that depending upon who your issue is with, it becomes a power battle of, is this person a high performer? Are they, do they have a relationship, friendship of some kind with somebody in power? And what do you have on your side? Are you a nobody that's raising the issue? So you need to understand the power dynamics within an organization before you speak up. And if you're going to lose that power battle, you may all want to start thinking about what my plan B or plan C is for moving on, whether it's to another department or to another organization, because there may be some battles you're not going to win. And that is, that is empowering right there. It may suck in the short term, but long term, you're a lot better off finding yourself out of a job, having tried to fight a fight you could not win because of the dynamics. And that's good to know beforehand. And so that's some of what I talk about as well.
So in the book, you're a great storyteller in the book, and outside the book too. What you wrote the book, you're selling books, obviously. You're going around and you're doing speaking. What is your mission with this book? A year from today, you look back on the year that the past 365 days. What does success look like for you? Where mission accomplished?
Sure. I have a few audiences that I've targeted in this, and this book, I think, is equally as powerful for the person that was like me, that was in the middle of being targeted. I think about the managers that are caught in the crossfire in battles, who may be told by the higher ups that we're not going to be taking any type of issues seriously. That Tell me when there's something that's affecting my bottom line, or I think it's affecting my bottom line. Leave me alone. And then to the CEOs, to boards of directors that say, hey, this culture stuff is touchy-feely. So-and-so is bothering somebody else. That's just a bunch of yelling and screaming. No, it can take down your finances, as Wynn Resorts today found out with a $35 million fine when they wanted to put in a new casino, but they covered up sexual harassment. It may be legal issues, lawsuits popping up. It could be your attraction and retention of employees. Your reputation may go in the tank. Your productivity may go south. All these different things. So I want to wake up some people. I want to educate some people. And I want to empower some people, especially at the leadership level, to say, this is on you when cultures are bad. These are the effects of it. And I want you to be able to look your employees in the eyes, the people whose families rely on you for a decent place to work, for a productive culture, and say, you think about them as well, not only about your organization, but for the people in it, that they deserve to spend their now 50 hours a week in an office in peace and in a place where they feel respected and a heck of a lot more productive.
Well, Pete, again, the book is The Arsonist in the Office. People want to learn more about you. They want to book you to speak. They want to get the book. Of course, you can find it on Amazon. But where's the one-stop shop, if there is one, that you want people to go to?
They can go to arsonistintheoffice.com. That is my book launch page. And at the top, they'll also see more about me and about the book, kind of just a lot of information on there. So they go there and they can find a lot of it. And then connect with me on LinkedIn or wherever else.
Awesome. Well, Pete Havel, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the Freedom Club podcast. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Curt.